Have you ever felt completely overwhelmed by the number of words that it seems like you have to learn in order to speak Spanish fluently? Maybe you have been gathering words and you have hundreds or even thousands of them floating around on flashcards or in your apps or on scattered notebook pages, and you're thinking, how in the world am I ever supposed to memorize all of these? I recently got this comment from one of my viewers. The trouble I have with learning individual words in context is that I have thousands, literally thousands of words and phrases in my Quizlet app, and how do you even attempt to memorize or learn them all when you have that many? This is so common. And this habit of collecting a bunch of words and storing them and then trying to memorize them all is a habit that we actually have to help a lot of the students that come to us break before they can move forward. One of the things that I like to share with them is how I learned Spanish without using a single flashcard. Now, flashcards are not bad, and you could absolutely use them if you like them. But what I want to show you in this video is how you can stop drowning in flashcards, in word lists, and instead build a custom vocabulary toolbox based on what you actually need to say. So we're going to talk about how to determine which words are worth learning during your Spanish input time, your listening and reading time, and how to go about learning those. Also, how to learn vocabulary that you need to use right away, like now. And finally, how to actually build your custom vocabulary toolbox, not a word list. Let's get into it. I'm so excited. But first, if you're new to me, well, te doy una gran bienvenida al canal. Me llamo Erika. I'm a former Spanish medical interpreter from the States, turned Spanish teacher and language coach, now living and loving life abroad here in Mexico. I help Spanish learners who are learning for the purpose of relocation or deep communication with their family, community members, or coworkers learn the Spanish that they need to learn to thrive and build relationships that they so desire. If that sounds like what you're trying to accomplish, you are in the right place, but it all starts with a rock solid Spanish routine. And vocabulary building is without a doubt an essential part of your Spanish routine. But if you are looking for something more comprehensive and you really want the A to Z and you want to make sure that you're including the listening, reading, writing, speaking, grammar, pronunciation, then I suggest that you download a free copy of my study plan, the Spanish Fluency Blueprint. You can grab that at ericarealanguage.com/blueprint or check out the link in the description. All right, how do you determine which words are worth learning during your input time when you're listening to and reading Spanish? The number one question that you need to ask yourself before each of your Spanish study sessions is, what is the purpose of what I'm about to do? I know that sounds simple, but it's going to have a direct effect on how you need to go about learning words. Knowing your purpose before you even start is going to determine where to put your focus, how focused you actually need to be, and what activities will actually support that goal. So let's imagine that you ask yourself that question and you determine, well, right now, my purpose is really just exposure. It's to expose myself to Spanish at the comprehensible input level, because when I do this, it helps me reinforce what I already know, because I'm seeing what I already know put together in different ways, which is very helpful. And I want to get familiar with new words. So that is my purpose. That's why I'm sitting down to read and listen right now, let's say. In this case, you may not have any immediate plans to use the new words that you learn in your writing or speaking, in your output. So you don't immediately need them necessarily for a conversation or a presentation that you're preparing for. You do know that this continued contact with the language is so important. And if you didn't know, well, now you know. So here, your goal is not to memorize every single new word. You do not need to pause and make flashcards. You don't even need to write down every new question or expression. If you do that every single time you input Spanish, that is the fast track to burnout. Instead, ask yourself these 3 simple questions as you go about reading and or listening. Which words are repeated so often that not knowing them is stopping me from understanding the main idea here? Which one-off words still feel important enough to the main idea of this context that I really want to look them up to understand what's going on. Which words am I curious about or just genuinely interested in knowing right now? Make sure there aren't too many, but these are the general 3 questions that you're going to be asking yourself to determine which words do I really want to investigate? And asking yourself those questions as you go helps you stay focused on comprehension, not necessarily production. So you're not necessarily obsessing over remembering what you learn. Now, what do you do with the words that meet those criteria? You can look them up as you go. You can wait until a natural break, the end of a paragraph or a page or a main idea to look them up, or click on them if you're using something that gives you the automatic translation. I personally prefer waiting until a natural break because sometimes then I'm able to figure out the meaning of the word through context and don't even have to look it up. I'm sure you'll experience the same thing. But when you choose to look up the words is not really so important. So you can determine how you want to do it based on your learning style. Once you look up your words or find out their meaning somehow, make sure you go back to the sentences where they were and just reread that entire sentence. For clarity, context, let those new words and new meanings marinate in the context, like I like to call it. Make sure that the definition that you looked up actually makes sense for this context, because of course, words can have many different meanings. But here's the question, but Erica, I look up the words, but then I forget them. What do I do when I forget them? Honestly, you will forget some of them, but I want you to understand that that's okay and expected. It doesn't mean that you wasted your time. Let's go back to the goal, to the purpose of this particular learning session that you set from the beginning. You wanted to expose yourself to Spanish at a comprehensible level, to reinforce what you know and expose yourself to new words and meanings. You did that. You made progress even if you didn't memorize those words yet. Here's why. You are very likely to come across those same words again in the future. In a video, a podcast, in a conversation, in a book, and the second, third, fourth time you hear them, they will start to sound more familiar. You may not be able to use them in conversation quite yet, but you'll recognize them. And that's the first step. Those words are now in your passive memory. Your brain can make sense of them when you hear or read them, even if you can't recall them in order to speak them or write them instantly yet. The first time you try to recall that word to use it, it may not be in your active memory quite yet. You may have to pause and think and bring it out, and you're feeling frustrated like, oh, I know this word. I feel like this is just so slow. But the second, third, fourth time you try to bring it out, you can retrieve it faster. This is why the combination of regular input and regular output is so crucial. You need both. And this is why the more exposure you get to Spanish overall, the easier it is to move all of the words that you're accumulating from passive to active memory, because you have more opportunity to expose yourself to them. And if you are regularly inputting and regularly trying to output what you can, then this shift from passive to active occurs even if you never make a single flashcard. Well, Erica, you said those words will come up again, but there are some words that just, I look at them on my notebook and I never heard it again. I never read it again. It never came up again. So I forgot it. Good. If you looked up a word and you forgot it because it never came up again, you don't need it right now. Your brain does declutter and make room for the things that it does need right now. So don't worry about forgetting them. Let them go. There may come a time when some of those words do become relevant to you. And when that time comes, you'll re-encounter them, you'll relearn them, and it will be easier because your brain has seen it at some point before. But right now, you've got more useful words to focus on. Now, I want to point something out. What can be said about the sheer act of writing things down, highlighting words, circling them, looking them up, keeping a notebook of things that interest you? The funny thing is that even if you never open that notebook again, even if you never go over your notes again, it's been scientifically shown that the act of writing or highlighting helps your brain process that word more deeply because you're engaging multiple senses. So I will never discourage you from underlining and physically writing down new words that you come across. It will help you. But what I want you to understand is that you don't have to stress and worry about committing all of them to memory just yet, because what you've done has done its job even if you don't realize it. And when it does come time for you to need those words, and so you find yourself relearning them, it's no longer learning from scratch. It's no longer learning from A to Z. It's more like H to Z or P to Z or even Y to Z. Just very, very short. Maybe you just need to see it one more time and you got it. It all depends on how much previous exposure you have to that word. So you're never starting from scratch. That's the power of input. Let me give you an example of how this process goes in real life. I remember the first time I heard the word soltura. Maybe it wasn't the first time, but it was the first time that I paid attention to it. Soltura, soltura. My daughter had just come off a stage. She had given a presentation in Spanish, and the chairman of this event then got on the stage and spoke about how she had presented herself with so much soltura. He said something like, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said something like, siempre me impresiona tu manera de hablar con tanta soltura. And I thought, interesting word. I didn't have any plans on using it, and I didn't even go to look it up, but from the context, I had pretty much figured out what it meant. She expressed herself with ease, with poise, that kind of thing. Later, I saw that word again in an article about public speaking. Later, I heard it on the news. They were talking about some candidate who had spoken with soltura. You know how when you notice something for the first time and then your brain starts noticing it everywhere? That's what was happening to me with the word soltura. And each time it became more familiar. Eventually, I found myself using it. I had lots of opportunities to use it, and now it's just a regular part of my vocabulary. It didn't get there because I flashcarded it. I didn't write it down. I didn't even look it up. I looked it up just now before I recorded this video, just to make sure that I was giving you guys the right definition. It means that you're speaking with ease, with confidence. So it got here in my brain through regular repeated exposure. And then it was there when I needed to use it. And of course, the same process has happened for hundreds and thousands of words. I don't have a story for most of them. That's one that I happen to remember, because most of this happens on an unconscious level. But I can tell you that it was not through flashcards. But isn't this comforting? Isn't it amazing to know that you can absorb so much through consistent contact with the language without pressure? And a lot of it will come together when you're ready. Next up, let's talk about the other side of this. What to do when your goal is output. When you have something coming up that you want to prepare for, a certain type of conversation, a presentation, a class, and you want to make sure that you can express yourself clearly, confidently, and with the right vocabulary, we do something different. Let's switch gears. How to learn vocabulary that you need right away. Again, you're going to start with that same question. What is the purpose of what I'm about to do right now during this Spanish study session? And this time your answer is different. This time your goal is not just general exposure. This time you want to prepare for something specific. Let me give you a few examples based on our students' experiences that you may relate to. Maybe you're meeting up with your father-in-law from Peru this weekend. You just picked up fishing as a hobby and he used to be a fisherman. You know he'll be excited to hear about it, but he's gonna have questions. Like, where are you fishing? What bait are you using? You know, he's pretty knowledgeable on the subject. That's something you can prepare for. Maybe you're preparing to give a workshop to a group of Spanish-speaking young girls about how to improve their confidence. That's what one of my students, Ayo, was able to accomplish. Maybe you're in my one-on-one program, Elevate Spanish Accelerator, and you have a work presentation coming up in a month, and we're helping you deliver that with confidence, con soltura. And as a one-on-one student, you have access to our group classes as well in the Caminos Conversation Club. And this week's topic is all about practicing asking for and giving directions in certain circumstances. So you've been in the club for a while and you're preparing for this week, and you know that, I'm probably going to be talking to Pete and Vanessa and Cindy, I'm just making up names here, who always join Thursdays at 7 or Fridays at 10, and that's the time I'm going to connect. So you're even visualizing in all of these circumstances, you're visualizing who you're probably going to speak to. This is very specific. You could prepare vocabulary ahead of time for that situation. For these circumstances, there is no need to wait and hope that one day through your input, you're going to get the words that you need to say. You can get them now. And this is where the method I call prepare, practice, present comes in. I introduce you to that in more detail in my workshop, in the next 90 Days Spanish workshop. You can find that at ericareallenglish.com/90days. But basically, you're going to prepare, you're going to identify the topic and the vocabulary that you're going to need to bring into fulfillment. What words or phrases will naturally come up in that scenario? Practice. Use those words in simple sentences. Say them to yourself. Write them down. Put them in a paragraph. Rehearse out loud. There's so many things that you can do to practice. And then present. Go in and present in the way of a conversation. Just have a conversation. You know more now because you're coming in more prepared, and now you have a very unique opportunity. And this is the opportunity that moves the input very quickly into your active memory where you can recall it forever. You are practicing with it in a real conversation. You are needing it for recall and for recall and usually with multiple people. If you're in my conversation club, you could say those new words that you looked up so many times with different people, because we give you the opportunity to have those conversations with different people, mimicking real life. So you did some active work this time. You prepared for a specific topic, and now you're having either guided or spontaneous conversations, just depending on your level. But either way, you're getting the opportunity to use your Spanish, including that new vocabulary. And maybe you wrote it down, maybe you flashcarded it, and that is how you'll remember it. So you're preparing for output, but don't neglect the input. In fact, when you're preparing for a specific situation, the type of input that you consume can change. If you are able to, you should use some targeted input that is directly related to what you're about to say. That's the process I walk you through in my Spanish Fluency Blueprint. Let's say that you're preparing to talk about fishing, like in an earlier example. You can read a short blog post in Spanish about that. You can watch a video about fishing in Spanish. Even just 5 minutes of targeted input will expose your brain to a lot of that vocabulary that you need, which means that your practice and your presentation will feel a lot more natural and will be a lot more natural, because you're not just trying to recall words that you put on a random list or on random flashcards. You heard them in context. All right, let's reel it in. What does this look like in practice? How do you build this custom vocabulary toolbox instead of just a word list? You don't just sit down and write fishing, vocabulary, all the words ever. You think, what do I actually want to say? What kinds of questions might I be asked? I know my father-in-law a little bit. I can kind of predict what he might ask me. What expressions or vocabulary will help me sound more confident and more natural? Then you start building your toolbox around those answers in complete sentences. You can script out as much as you want to help you keep everything in context. ¿Te gusta pescar? Yo siempre pesco los fines de semana. ¿Usas carnada viva o artificial? Me encanta ir al lago en la mañana. Casi siempre atrapamos algo, aunque sea pequeño. Para mí, pescar es muy relajante, etc., etc. Depending on how you like to learn, you can do this preparation on your own, using a tool, using dictionaries, using ChatGPT. You can have your teacher or speaking partner help you in this preparation process. It's super useful to have someone look over what you've prepared, but where you really, really want humans is at that presentation stage. You want to talk to real people, because that's when your Spanish goes from textbook to real life, to real human connection. That's when you put in those reps. And the more reps you put in with real people, the more your nerves can calm down, the more you'll get used to thinking on your feet and being human, because I bet you're learning Spanish for the purpose of human communication. Now you have an organized vocabulary toolbox for this certain subject. Maybe this is in a flashcard set that you create with full sentences. Maybe this is in a notebook in a dedicated section, but you've gathered words, you've gathered ideas on a certain subject. And so when you go to review, you know where it is. And the more subjects that you choose to speak about that are relevant to your life and your situation, the less review you're going to need. Because after that initial preparation, you'll find that those subjects come up frequently for you. You have to recall those words often, and then you'll have them. And when you want to add to your topic-based collection, you know exactly where to go. It helps to keep you organized and learning and having fun. If you would like to go deeper into this method and learn how to prepare, practice, present effectively, then I do invite you to my workshop, the Next 90 Days Spanish Workshop. I'll walk you through the process in more detail. I'll show you several student case studies and what they've been able to accomplish so that you can see the method in action. You'll learn how to use the vocabulary that you actually need faster and finally start having the conversations you care about the most. Be sure to register for that now. And did you know that I picked up a lot of what I'm sharing with you today about vocabulary acquisition and retention, not only through my experience learning Spanish in general, but through my experience of becoming a Spanish-English medical interpreter. So if you'd like to know more about that, check out this video next.